Have you ever walked into your own home and realized in a single instant that nothing inside belongs to you anymore? Not the air, not the silence, not even the person who once promised to wait for you. I'm Lucas Reeve, Captain, United States, Army, 20 years of service. I've faced IEDs in Kandahar, insurgents in Helmand Province, and the dead stare of men who knew they weren't going home. I've never flinched, never folded, but nothing prepared me for the quiet ambush waiting in my own kitchen. That day, I came home early from deployment. No fanfare, no warning. Just a man wanting to surprise his wife with a dinner she didn't have to reheat. To feel normal again, even for a night. But there it was, her phone, screen still lit, message preview glowing like a spotlight on a lie. Operation successful. You're amazing. Can't wait until he's gone again. Signed, Damon Ellis, Sergeant, decorated, my battlefield brother. And from that moment, I knew something with perfect clarity. The war wasn't over. It had just moved indoors, and I was about to fight it my way, carefully, quietly, precisely. I met Julia in a dusty coffee shop outside Fort Bragg in 2005. She was waitressing part-time, studying psychology, and had a laugh that made everything around it feel warmer. I was 2 years into active duty, all sharp edges and calloused knuckles, and still learning how to speak in something other than military code. Julia softened those edges. She had this ability to make a room feel like home, something I didn't know I missed until she gave it to me. We married after my second deployment. Small ceremony, nothing fancy, just close friends and 2 gold bands that meant something more than tradition. We didn't have much, just a used car, a small condo, and my GI Bill. But we had momentum, purpose. I was climbing the ranks. She opened a trauma counseling practice, working with spouses and children of veterans. We understood sacrifice. We made it our rhythm. And then there was Damon Ellis. I met Damon during basic, the kind of soldier who made hard things look easy. We deployed together 3 times. He pulled me out of a burning Humvee outside Ramadi. I dragged him to a medevac after an ambush in Kunar. We were more than brothers in arms. We were bonded by things we didn't have the words to unpack. He gave the best man toast at my wedding, held Julia's hand when she went into labor with our daughter while I was stuck in Qatar. When my father died, Damon flew in on a 24-hour pass just to stand next to me at the funeral. For almost 2 decades, we moved in lockstep. By the time I hit 40, I was a battalion operations officer. Damon had transferred into training command, but stayed close. Julia and I had built what looked like the ideal military family, a strong marriage, a tight circle of trust, a daughter, Leah, now 13, who called Damon Uncle D and believed every story he told. Our house, bought with VA loan assistance, sat on a quiet street near Raleigh. Brick facade, an oak tree out front, a flag out back. It was the kind of home you dream about when you're sleeping in barracks overseas. I took pride in every inch of it. Mowed the lawn in straight lines, fixed the porch myself, kept the gutters clear even in storm season. But with every deployment, I noticed the distance grow a little more. Julia became more independent, which I respected. But she also became more guarded, more tired. She said it was the work, the emotional labor of listening to other people's trauma all day. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. When I shipped out for a short-term assignment in Europe last spring, she hugged me a little too quickly. Didn't hold on. Her eyes were already elsewhere, and I told myself not to take it personally. I should have. That's the thing about people like me. We're trained to assess threats, anticipate risk, read terrain, but we assume loyalty like a constant, a fixed variable. We forget that the battlefield back home has its own ambushes, its own fault lines. Julia was part of the life I built. Damon was part of the life that saved me, and somewhere between the base gates and the front door of our house, they'd rewritten what loyalty meant. Together. At the time, I didn't know how deep the damage ran. I only knew something sacred had been touched, and that it would never be untouched again. It started with little things, Small, almost imperceptible fractures that only become obvious when you look back with the clarity of hindsight. Julia began locking her phone. Not just setting a passcode, but keeping it on her at all times, even in the house. She used to leave it charging on the kitchen counter while she cooked, sang along to old blues records. Now, it was always face down, always silenced. When I asked about it, she brushed me off. Too many spam calls lately, she said. Clients texting late. Logical, professional, reasonable, but wrong. There were also the Thursday nights. She'd started attending a peer trauma group at a local wellness center. I respected it at first. Her work was heavy and everyone in our world needs an outlet. But she never wanted to talk about what went on there, not even in vague terms, and she never missed a meeting. Not once. The first time I saw Damon's truck parked across the street on a Thursday night, I thought nothing of it. He'd been stopping by more often since I left for Europe, checking on the house, helping with small repairs. He and I had arranged that. It made sense. But then it happened again. And again. And once, when I called Julia just to check in, she said she was out running errands while I watched from a base video feed as Damon's truck sat in our driveway for 2 hours. The mind wants to rationalize. You don't serve this long without learning to compartmentalize discomfort. So I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was tired, stressed, overworked. I had a family who loved me, a best friend I trusted with my life. What else did a man need? And then I noticed the perfume, not hers. New, different, something floral and sharp. She started wearing it even around the house, no occasion, no explanation. When I commented on it, lightly, playfully, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Just something one of the girls from group recommended, she said, brushing past me like I was a wall. At night, she started going to bed earlier, not with a headache or an excuse, just quiet exits. She took her phone with her. Sometimes I'd come upstairs an hour later and find her asleep with the screen dimly glowing in her hand. But the most telling shift wasn't in her habits, it was in her silences. We used to talk about everything. My missions, her clients, what we'd do when I retired. A cabin in Vermont. A Jeep we'd rebuild together, a dog, all these small shared dreams we'd placed on a shelf for later. Now she didn't ask about my work, didn't ask about my next posting. She barely asked about anything at all. She was polite, present, but absent in all the ways that mattered. And that's what betrayal feels like at first, not like a knife, not like rage, but like walking through your own house and feeling like a guest. Damon Ellis and I weren't just friends. We were the kind of bonded that only war can forge. You don't manufacture that kind of loyalty. It's earned in blood and dirt and silence. We met during my first deployment to Iraq. I was a green second lieutenant trying to prove myself. Damon was a staff sergeant with 3 tours under his belt and a reputation for handling heat with ice in his veins. The first time we went on patrol together, he saved my life. Insurgents had hidden an IED in the back of a donkey cart. Primitive, ugly, effective. Damon spotted the wiring in time, yanked me down into the dirt with a curse and a shoulder tackle that dislocated my arm. That tackle bought us 5 seconds, enough to live, enough to fight. After that, we were brothers. It wasn't a choice. We just were. Over the next 12 years, we bled in the same dust, bunked in the same hellholes, ate the same bad food, buried the same friends, and learned how to keep going. We got through it together. When I nearly lost my leg in Helmand, he visited every day during my rehab. He's the one who told me not to take the medical discharge, not to let the uniform go until I was ready. He was at my wedding, gave the toast, spoke about sacrifice and loyalty like they were gospel. When Leah was born and Julia went into labor, while I was halfway around the world, Damon was the one who drove her to the hospital, sat by her side, cut the cord, held my daughter before I did. I used to joke that if I died overseas, Julia should just marry Damon. It was dark humor, military humor, a kind of coping. But deep down, I meant it. There was no one I trusted more. If I was gone, he'd protect her, protect my family. He was the kind of man I believed would die before betraying me. We bought into that myth together, that nothing could come between us. Not bullets, not trauma, not time. Even when we transitioned into quieter roles, me into operations, Damon into recruitment and training, we stayed in sync. Weekends on the range, hunting trips in the Smokies, grill nights. Damon and Julia always got along well. I liked that. It made things feel normal, made the separation easier. In hindsight, that comfort was the Trojan horse. The boundaries between Damon and Julia had always been close, but never until now had I questioned them. I think betrayal is often rooted in proximity, not malice. The people who can hurt you most are the ones you've already given all your defenses to. I didn't keep walls up with Damon. He already lived inside them. I remember once, during a long drive back from a joint training exercise in Louisiana, he asked me what scared me most. Not in combat, but in life. I'd said failure, losing purpose, letting my family down. He didn't answer right away, just nodded and looked out the window. Now I wonder if he was already halfway to betrayal even then. The irony is that while I was out earning medals for courage under fire, I was blind to the fire building in my own backyard. Damon was there for every critical moment in my adult life, every deployment, every promotion, every holiday when I couldn't be with family. He'd even helped me install the ceiling fan in Julia's office, the one I stood under the night I found his message on her phone. That night, after the discovery, I lay in bed staring at the fan, remembering how we argued about which wire was neutral, remembering how Julia had made us lemonade and laughed while we worked. 3 people in one house, building something I thought was unshakable. But Damon hadn't just violated our friendship. He'd infiltrated the foundation of my family, of my identity. And when someone you trust that deeply becomes the one pulling your world apart, you don't just feel betrayed. You feel disoriented, like gravity changed direction, like nothing you believed about loyalty was ever real. But that's where soldiers differ from civilians. When the ground shifts, we don't run, we recalibrate, we plan, and then we strike. When I deployed to Germany for a joint NATO training program last fall, it was only supposed to be for 6 weeks. A low-risk assignment, mostly planning simulations and coordinating logistics between allied units. No gunfire, no sandstorms, just PowerPoint battles and briefing rooms. But it was the first time in years that I felt uneasy boarding the plane. Not about the mission, but about what I was leaving behind. Julia hugged me at the curb. It was quick, clinical. Her arms wrapped around me like muscle memory, not meaning. She whispered, "Be safe." But her voice didn't carry the weight it used to. Leah wasn't with us. She'd stayed at a friend's for a sleepover. It was just me and Julia, 2 people with a history, but no present moment between them. As I wheeled my duffel bag into the terminal, I looked back once. She was already in the car, already driving away. Over in Germany, I kept busy, drilled, briefed, networked. But during the quiet hours, early mornings in the barracks, late nights in the officers' mess, I found myself checking my phone more than usual. Texts from Julia were sparse, polite, functional. Updates about Leah's school, a reminder to submit a VA form, a note about the heat acting up in the guest room. Nothing emotional. Nothing personal. The distance between us wasn't just physical anymore. It was systemic, intentional. One Thursday, after finishing a planning session with a British unit, I called home. Julia didn't pick up. An hour later, she texted, "Sorry, just got out of trauma group." I knew the group ended at 8 p.m. sharp. My call had been at 9:15. I said nothing. I didn't want to be the jealous husband thousands of miles away accusing his wife of imagined sins. But the math wasn't adding up. And then came the photos. My buddy Eric Moreno, a retired major now working private security, texted me a shot he'd taken at a veteran charity event near our neighborhood. Said he thought I was back home when he saw Damon and Julia there, side by side, casual, intimate, Damon's hand resting gently on the small of her back. They looked like a couple. Eric didn't mean anything by it. He was just making conversation. But that image hit me harder than any mortar ever had. It was the confirmation my gut had been whispering for weeks. I spent the rest of that night staring at the ceiling of my barracks bunk, heart silent, but racing. I thought about the history we shared, me and Damon, me and Julia. And I wondered how much of it had already been erased, rewritten without my consent. And I began to ask a dangerous question. What else don't I know? The ghosts of home had followed me across the ocean, and when I landed back in North Carolina, I wasn't going to ignore them anymore. I was going to exorcise them. One by one. I returned to North Carolina 3 days earlier than scheduled. Didn't tell anyone, didn't call, didn't even turn on my location when I landed. I needed to see it for myself, needed to know that I wasn't just losing sleep over suspicions, over shadows that might vanish in the daylight. I wanted to believe there was still a version of this story where I was wrong, where I'd misread the signs, where this war I felt building inside me was all in my head. I took a cab from the base, told the driver to kill the headlights as we turned onto my street. My truck was still parked in long term at the base lot. Julia didn't know I was back. It was just after 7:30 p.m. A Thursday. The porch light was on. Her car was in the driveway. Damon's wasn't, but I didn't expect it to be. Not in plain sight. I crept around the side of the house. Years of recon training kicked in, not as memory, but as instinct. I knew which stair creaked. I knew the blind spot under the kitchen window. I had planned missions in hostile provinces, with less tactical awareness than I had of my own backyard. The living room was empty. TV off, lights low, but the upstairs hallway light was on, and from the open bedroom window I heard laughter. Hers. And then his voice, low, familiar, comfortable. Didn't move. Not yet. Not until I had something more than sound. I slipped inside through the back door I knew she never locked. The air smelled like wine and something sweet. Perfume I didn't recognize but had smelled faintly on her neck before. In the kitchen, her phone was sitting by the sink. Screen up. A message preview lit up before I even touched it. That photo from last weekend is still on my phone. We look so good together. Delete if he's back early. Love you. I didn't need to. Read the rest. I took one breath. Just one. Then I walked up the stairs like I was entering a building I'd just cleared. Calm, measured. The bedroom door was half open. I pushed it slowly. Julia was sitting on the edge of the bed in leggings and a t-shirt, her hair down. She was holding Damon's jacket in her lap, the same leather jacket I'd given him for his 40th birthday. The same jacket I'd once lent him after a winter night range exercise because he'd forgotten his gear bag. She looked up and froze. Her face didn't contort in guilt or surprise. It just emptied, like all the lies had been waiting for this moment to collapse. I looked at the jacket, then at her. Then I stepped forward and placed her phone on the nightstand, screen still glowing. Neither of us said a word for a full 10 seconds. "You're home," she finally said, as if that was the problem. I nodded once. Early. Damon wasn't there, not physically, but he didn't need to be. He'd left his jacket, his message, his shadow. She opened her mouth to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a lie, but no sound came. She didn't cry, didn't rage, just sat there small and silent, holding the proof of her betrayal like it weighed more than she thought it would. "I see," I said, and I did. All of it. I walked out without slamming the door, walked past the pictures on the wall, past the kitchen where she used to hum while cooking, past the hallway where Leah used to run in circles in her pajamas. I stepped outside into the cold, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt completely alone in my own house. But I also felt something else. Clarity. This wasn't just personal. It was structural, and I was going to take it apart, one piece at a time. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of rage, Those first burning waves had passed, but because my mind had entered a mode I knew well. Recon, assessment, pre-mission clarity. When things slow down and every decision becomes deliberate, I stayed in the guest room. Quiet. Cold. My boots still by the door, duffel untouched. Julia didn't knock. She didn't try to explain. We lived under the same roof like strangers separated by a chasm she had dug and Damon had helped widen. But while she slept, I went to work. First, I pulled a copy of our marriage contract from the fireproof safe in my closet. I'd always known we had a prenup. Julia's father had insisted. She'd inherited a small trust and her parents wanted it protected. I didn't argue. In fact, I added my own clause. One that most people forget about. A mutual fidelity clause. It had sat quietly in that file for 17 years, collecting dust and potential. Next, I turned to Damon. He wasn't just my friend. He'd been my partner in a post-military security firm we co-founded with another officer 3 years ago. Valor Watch, we called it. We provided private security consulting for corporations, government contractors, and infrastructure projects. Damon had a 20% stake, and like most military veterans turned businessmen, we'd structured everything tightly. I made a quiet call to our lawyer, Rachel Hines, someone I trusted with my life and my legacy. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp, even after hours. I need to talk through a dissolution clause, I said. Something wrong? I'll explain in person. I need it clean, quick, quiet. The next morning, while Julia took a shower and prepared for whatever script she'd been rehearsing in her head, I met Rachel in her office downtown. We went clause by clause through our operating agreement for Valor Watch. It was tight, but not impenetrable. Section 11 gives you leeway, she said, tapping the document. If a partner's personal conduct threatens company reputation or client trust, the remaining partners can initiate a buyout with majority approval. Damon never saw that clause as a threat, just a formality, something to appease corporate clients. But I drafted it for this exact reason, because I know that in war your flanks are always the first to bleed. Start the paperwork, I said. I also gave her the digital copies I'd taken, screenshots of Damon's messages, the time-stamped call logs from Julia's phone, and a GPS log I'd pulled from the home's Wi-Fi router. Damon had connected to our network multiple times during hours he claimed to be at the range or client sites. Cross-reference enough of those connections, and a timeline emerges. One that tells a very different story than he ever admitted to. Rachel, read through the documentation in silence, her expression steady but sharp. This isn't just betrayal, she said. This is liability. If this gets out, it won't just cost him his job, it could cost the firm. Which is why I'm removing him before that happens. That night, I returned home and ate dinner alone. Julia sat across the room, pretending to read a novel she hadn't touched in years. I didn't say much, just watched the clock, listened to the rhythm of the house, measured her glances, took mental notes because now I wasn't just a husband. I was the mission commander, and the operation had begun. 3 days after I'd returned home early, the paperwork was ready. Rachel called it Code Red Clause, as shorthand. The corporate safeguard no one ever expects to need. I'd designed it to protect the company from external scandal, but now the threat came from the inside, from someone I had once saluted, trusted, loved, in a way only soldiers understand. We filed the preliminary motion with our internal review board, a formality really. Our third partner, Mitchell Brandt, a former Marine turned CFO, was furious when I told him what had happened. Not just at Damon's betrayal, but at the risk it posed to everything we'd built post-service. Our firm was in the final stage of securing a multi-year government contract with a major defense subcontractor. The vetting process was intense. Personal conduct mattered. Any scandal, even a whisper, and we'd be out. Mitch's response was immediate. Terminate his position. Initiate the buyout full speed. So we triggered Section 11. Under its terms, Damon would be forced to sell his stake back to the company at a reduced valuation based on conduct detrimental to operational integrity. It was legal. It was binding. It was devastating. But it was only the first step. Rachel and I also revisited my prenuptial agreement. 17 years ago, Julia and I had signed it without hesitation. She had her protections. I had mine. Among them, the infidelity clause. A single breach would nullify her claim to any assets gained during the marriage, including equity in any business established after the wedding date. Most people forget about clauses like that. They assume fidelity is just a romantic formality, but I didn't. I'd seen too many of my brothers return from war to broken homes and empty bank accounts, so I built in safeguards. Quiet ones, legal ones. Rachel reviewed the documentation I'd provided, the messages, the GPS pings, the pattern of deception over time. She nodded once. This will hold up. It's ironclad. I left her office that afternoon with 2 folders, one for Julia, one for Damon. The mission was clear. Neither of them would see it coming. That evening I cooked dinner. Julia came into the kitchen like she always had, cautious, as if she still believed we might talk, that I might yell, fight, accuse. Anything but what I was actually doing. I served her a plate. She looked surprised. "Thank you," she said, quietly. I nodded, poured her a glass of wine, and waited until she took a sip before I slid the folder across the table. "What's this?" she asked. "Your copy," I said, "of the agreement you signed 17 years ago, and the consequences of breaking it." She opened it, read, stopped. Her face went pale. "Ron, we should talk." "We will," I said. "Just not tonight. Because tonight wasn't for tears, or rage, or forgiveness. It was for precision, for clarity. For the moment where the war she started became the war I would end, with discipline, with documentation, and with justice. I called Damon 2 days later, told him I needed to meet, face to face, about an urgent issue regarding the Valor Watch expansion project, kept my voice neutral, calm, professional, the way I'd spoken to him 1,000 times before in war rooms and boardrooms alike. He agreed without hesitation, said he'd swing by the office after hours. We met in the main conference room, glass walls, no distractions, just the hum of overhead lights and the faint buzz of tension thickening the air. Damon walked in with his usual confidence, wearing that same leather jacket I'd once gifted him, the same one Julia had clutched like a confession. "Hey, man," he said casually, dropping into a chair. "What's going on?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and slid a folder across the table. Inside, the Article 11 buyout notice, the partnership dissolution agreement, and a summary of the conduct clause he was now in violation of. He opened it. Read. Stopped. His face shifted from confusion to recognition to something cold and cornered. "What the hell is this?" he asked, voice low. "You know what it is," I said. "This is me cutting you out of the company you tried to poison." Damon leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Poison? Ron, come on. You and Julia. Things haven't been right for a while. It happened." He said it like it was an accident, like betrayal was gravity and he'd tripped. "No," I replied. "It didn't just happen. You planned it. You came into my house. Slept in my bed when I was deployed. You broke the one line we never cross." He opened his mouth to push back, but I didn't let him. "I have everything," I said. "The texts, the visits, the security logs. I even pulled footage from the front door camera you didn't know I installed last summer." His mouth closed. I let the silence hang for a beat too long, long enough for him to feel it in his bones. "You're invoking the clause?" he asked. "Already have." Mitch signed off. "You'll be bought out at 70 cents on the dollar, far less than the valuation we'd have reached if this never happened. But it's still generous considering." "Considering what?" he challenged. "That I could have buried you," I said. "I could have gone public, destroyed your credibility in every contract circle from here to Quantico, but I'm not interested in revenge that loud. I'm interested in peace that's earned." He stared at me, hurt now under the anger. "This is how you end 15 years?" I nodded. "No, this is how you ended it." I'm just closing the file. I stood. Up, sign it, or I take everything to the board, the press, and your wife if she doesn't already know. You'll lose more than a paycheck. He didn't argue, didn't plead, just sat there, stone-faced, broken, realizing too late that I hadn't come for confrontation. I'd come for closure, and I wasn't leaving without it. Damon signed the papers the next morning. No fanfare, no pushback. Just a scribbled signature on the dotted line delivered through our company counsel with no eye contact, no handshake, no final words. After everything we'd been through, firefights, funerals, fatherhood, this was how it ended. A legal envelope and a receipt for a mistake he thought would never surface. Within 48 hours, his access to company accounts, systems, and client files was revoked. His name was scrubbed from the Valor Watch website. An internal memo went out, announcing his departure due to irreconcilable differences regarding organizational integrity. Clean, professional, cold. And Julia? She received her own envelope that same week, delivered by a process server while she was leaving her office. Inside, the formal divorce petition and a notarized copy of our prenuptial agreement, marked and annotated to highlight the infidelity clause, a clause she had signed without hesitation all those years ago, never expecting it would come back to define the ending. She tried to talk. She cried. Once. But I'd already made peace with the version of her I thought I married and the stranger who replaced her. There was nothing left to discuss. My attorney submitted the motion to protect all marital assets tied to the company, to the house, to our investments. Julia would receive only what was outlined in the agreement, no more. The vacation cabin, mine, the joint savings, locked until settlement, the equity in Valor Watch, protected. The clause was enforceable and airtight. She wouldn't be left with nothing, but she would be left with exactly what she'd earned. I heard from mutual friends that she had taken some time off work. Told people she was dealing with stress. I imagine she was. Not just because of the paperwork, but because her future had been built on a lie, and the lie collapsed faster than she ever thought it could. As for Damon, he disappeared from the industry almost overnight. Word spreads fast in our world, especially when it comes to integrity. You can bounce back from failure, from bankruptcy, even from insubordination, but not from betrayal, not from dishonor, especially not among veterans who still believe in the old codes. I learned later he tried to start his own private firm, called on old clients, leveraged contacts we'd built together. None of them returned his calls. He ended up taking a job across the state line with a civilian security outfit that didn't ask too many questions. Lower pay, less respect, no future, just a paycheck, and a reminder. Meanwhile, I kept building. I poured myself into Valor Watch, rebuilt our leadership, reassured our clients, delivered on every contract with military precision. My hands were steady again, my mind was clear, and the best part? I hadn't burned anything down. No shouting, no scandal, no scenes. I'd simply removed the infection, and now for the first time in months I could breathe without tasting smoke. By the end of that quarter, my exit plan was complete. I sold my remaining stake in Valor Watch to Mitch and our board-approved successor. It wasn't because I couldn't lead the company anymore. It was because I no longer wanted to carry its memories. The firm had become a battlefield in its own right, and I'd fought hard to protect its integrity. But once the smoke cleared, I didn't want to keep living where I had almost bled out. I negotiated a clean, quiet departure. Full payout. Non-compete clause limited to 2 years. No press release, just a firm handshake, a folder of final documents, and a silent elevator ride down to the lobby where I'd spent a decade of my second life. Then I moved out of the house. One Julia and I had bought during the second deployment. The one we thought would be our forever home. I left behind the furniture, the photos, even the hardwood floors I had laid myself one long summer. I took only what mattered, my service medals, Leah's drawings from when she was little, and the, keys to a new place 2 counties over. It was a small cabin with a wide porch and a workshop out back, Just enough space for quiet, for rebuilding, for breath. No ghosts. No questions. Total extraction. That's what we used to call it in the field. When you get your team out with no casualties, no compromise. Mission complete. Wounds closed. And that's exactly what I needed now. Not revenge. Not sympathy. Just peace. And a place to remember who I was before they tried to redefine me. I didn't disappear. That was never the plan. Soldiers don't retreat. We reposition. 6 weeks after selling my stake in Valor Watch, I enrolled in a veteran mentorship program out of Asheville. No suits, no titles, just a folding chair and a circle of men and women who had seen what I'd seen, and some who'd seen worse. We talked about reintegration, family, betrayal, trauma, the invisible battles that come long after the shooting stops. I didn't speak much at first, just listened. But when I did start to talk, I told the truth. Not the headline version, the messy version. The one with shame, with failure, with clarity carved from pain. That's where I found my next mission. I started giving talks. First to small veteran groups, then at local colleges. Then came the invitation I didn't expect. A congressional subcommittee hearing on military family support systems. They'd heard about my story through a nonprofit contact and wanted testimony from someone who had survived the personal cost of service. That phrase stuck with me. Because that's exactly what betrayal is. It's a casualty. A wound you didn't train for. So I stood before that room in DC, a panel of suits and pens and scripted empathy, and I gave them the unscripted version. I talked about loyalty, not just in combat, but in kitchens and bedrooms and boardrooms. I told them that not all wars are fought with rifles. Some are fought in silence, in courtrooms, in custody battles, in long, sleepless nights spent wondering if you were ever truly seen by the people you sacrificed for. Afterward, a young aide approached me with tears in her eyes. Her father was a Marine. Her mother had left him for his commanding officer. She said my words made her understand why he never talked about it, but also why he never really came home. That moment told me everything. I hadn't lost my purpose. I'd just been reassigned. Different battlefield. Same code. Protect, serve, endure. And now teach others to do the same. Because justice, when quiet and precise, doesn't just heal one man, it can ripple outward, change the terms of battle for someone who thought they were losing theirs alone. Year later, I wake up to quiet. No briefing schedules. No inbox filled with damage control. Just the soft rhythm of wind against pine, and the slow pour of black coffee into a mug I didn't have to earn with silence. My daughter visits when school allows. She brings stories and questions. She brings forgiveness I never asked for. That's the part no one tells you. What survives betrayal isn't the plan, but the people who still choose you after it. I built a new life. Not louder, not flashier, just clearer. And if you've ever been in the place I was, in the middle of something falling apart while the world keeps moving, just know this. What broke you doesn't define you. What you do next does. So take a breath. Reclaim your peace. And if this story found you at the right moment, maybe it's because your own turning point is closer than you think. Leave a comment if this hit home for you. I read every single one. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Not just to this channel, but to the idea that you can come back from anything, even this, especially this.